Hello, everyone. My name is Khushbu. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer at Shikshaloka, where our singular mission is to enable leadership in education. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope all of you are comfortable and keeping safe and healthy. It is a beautiful and bright afternoon here in Bangalore, and I promise that over the next 60 minutes, this warmth, this brightness will radiate and reach you, no matter which part of the globe you have signed in from. And I'm confident because I have this wonderful, inspiring set of leaders with me who have joined us today as panelists. Before I proceed, may I please request you to please keep sharing your questions, your thoughts, your feedback using the Q&A tab or the chat box on your screen. To begin with, it is my absolute honor to introduce you to Dr. Santosh Matthew. He currently serves as the country lead for social and public finance policy at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in India. He has extensive experience in the Indian Administrative Services from 1985 to 2017. He was previously Additional Chief Secretary for the Government of Bihar and had also been the chairperson of the National Council for Teacher Education, among many other distinguished roles. To top all that, he holds a PhD in Development Studies and is currently also on the board of the Global Innovation Fund in London. Dr. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today. Next, we had Mr. Sanjay Kumar. Sanjay ji is a senior civil servant of Government of India and has more than 30 years of experience in the Indian Administrative Service. He is currently serving as the Additional Chief Secretary in the Education Department, Government of Bihar. Interestingly, Dr. Santosh Matthew and Sanjay ji have worked together briefly. Currently, Sanjay ji is held up in another government meeting. I hope he is able to join us in some time. Coming to our final panelist, our third panelist is very, very special. Ashraf Patel. She's the co-founder of Pravah and ComMutiny, the Youth Collective. I'm sure you'll be intrigued by the name ComMutiny. She's a passionate practitioner and advocate of inside-out youth leadership. Earlier this year, the Shaw Foundation and the World Economic Forum awarded Ashraf with the Social Innovator of the Year award. This was in recognition for over 3 decades of her investment in building the youth leadership in India. She's an Ashoka Fellow and is also on the board of leading organizations like Oxfam India and IVCO. Interestingly, while giving away the award, Mrs. Shaw said, "This award represents a new ecosystem of leaders who are driving change and shifting organizations and systems towards a more just, inclusive, and sustainable future." And interestingly, this discussion, the next 60 minutes, is exactly about that. How do we work towards sustainable shifts? And what is the precise role of leadership in catalyzing these sustainable shifts? Ashraf, first and foremost, congratulations on the much-deserved award. We look forward to listening to your experiences and thoughts, and thank you so much for joining us today. Yeah, so we are all set to get started. And when Neeraj opened up, I remember that wonderful poem that said, leadership is this and is also not this. It is, as a word, is multifaceted and has multiple interpretations. Gandhiji was a leader, Margaret Thatcher was a leader, Mother Teresa was a leader, and by the way, Hitler was also a leader. So I'm curious, Dr. Matthew and Ashraf, what does leadership mean to you? And Ashraf, why don't we start with you?
Thank you so much, Khushbu, and hello, Dr. Santosh and everyone here. It was very nice to also have a chance to hear Shibulal. So thank you so much for having me here. What does leadership mean to me? Very difficult question, but I'll try to put it in the way what I just feel and believe. I'm a great fan of J. Krishnamurti. Many educators here, so I'm sure there are many to share. And he talked about life. To live is to relate, and living is relatedness. And for me, leadership is really about 2 things. One is to understand the relationship between self and society. And when I mean society, it is the people and the planet both. So my relationship with the rest of the world, the people and the planet, is, so leadership to me is a deep understanding of that, a connection to that, making the connection. And with that understanding, leadership to me is making conscious and concerted personal and public actions in the real world towards promoting love, which to me is the core word and feeling, to promoting love, and with it, equality, justice, freedom, and fraternity, what we treasure in our Constitution. That to me is leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashraf. And I love the word action and action to promote love. I mean, that is something at Shiksha Lokam, we have a very dear phrase where we say leadership is all about ability to drive these conscious, continuous improvements. So I know that's something that I completely resonate with. Dr. Santosh Matthew, you have been a leader you have demonstrated leadership in different roles across government and now in foundation. What are your thoughts on leadership?
I was thinking about this whole question of leadership ever since you have been chasing me to join this panel. And I'm not sure I have an answer I would be proud of, but here are some of my thoughts. Leadership is at multiple levels. First of all, your ability to lead yourself, your ability to lead in terms of your family, kith and kin, the wider community. And in an interconnected world that we live in today, we also have to think of the larger world. And me, my family, my community is no longer a canvas we can restrict ourselves to, because the consequences of our action are actually quite widespread. Whether it be social justice in the community we live in, or global warming, which is being furthered because of the consequences of the way we live. Now, if I look at leadership at all these levels, surprise, surprise, it reached the same point, and that is the point of action. So leadership to me, therefore, is the way we summon the resources that we have, physical, mental, financial, social, all the resources that we have, how do we marshal that for action in the various levels that we talked about? The difference between leadership and contemplation is that leadership requires contemplation. But contemplation which does not lead to action is useful, but is not leadership and is not enough in today's world because of the enormous amount of deprivation, injustice, and the collective destruction that we are all engaged in the way that we have currently organized our lives. It is not my intention to enter into a social commentary on the way our economic models have been set up. That's not my purpose. But when I reflect upon leadership, that's what comes across to me. Leadership for yourself, leadership for your family, leadership for your community, and leadership for the world. And for this, example is really the most, I think, meaningful terminology that I would fall back upon. I'm reminded about the little things that I reflected while raising my children, who are now adults and have children of their own. And it was clear to me that what I was telling them had no impact. Well, probably they had little impact, but it is as the years passed and as I watched them, I can see that it is what I did that had the maximum impact. It's the example that I set. Not always good, but that's what has deepest impact. So it's a mixed bag for me, and it's a bundle of reflections. And I am sorry if it is not the crisp answer that you're looking for, because I actually don't have one.
I think one thing that we all agreed upon from the beginning itself, that leadership is, as a word, it may come out as something very short, but what it means to each one of us can be so varied. So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, Dr. Matthew. And what stood out for me is, and what I really strongly resonate with, is how you talked about the relationship between leadership and contemplation. Sometimes we see it as a binary discussion. You know, are you thinking or are you just acting? But you are seeing it's thoughtful action is what actually converts or gets demonstrated as leadership. And because both of you talked about action, I'm curious, and Dr. Matthew, I would like to start with you. This question is for you. You are someone in a very unique position because you have experienced the system, the public system from inside, as well as from an outside as a public policy expert in your current role. And there's been so much action that has been happening in the system. There are shifts that our education system, and specifically if I talk about education system, it has made. From a question to access to now we are discussing quality, that in itself is a huge leap. In fact, there are many such shifts that I'm sure in your tenure as an IAS officer, you would have led. So I'm curious, what do you see or what do you fondly remember as some of the key successes and failures? And when you reflect, when you think, what do you think caused them? What were the are there common factors that enable certain successes or cause certain failures?
Yeah, okay, that's a nice one. Can I take a little time to answer that?
Yes, we have a lot of time.
Oh, good, thanks. So I mark my official life in a minimum of 2 phases. Phase 1 was still about the time from 1985 till around 2004, where my primary goal was to act, to lead. As an IAS officer, at a very young age, you are given an opportunity to lead large teams. You have the ability to carve narratives and follow through. So many examples. And I was a young IAS a probationer, as we used to be called at those days, and now they're called officer trainees. And the first instance was in Motihari, East Champaran, where Mahatma Gandhi started his, indigo work. And seeing the poverty and lack of livelihoods, I thought that, listen, let me convert a defunct Goshala into a thriving dairy and see how we can give livelihoods to poor women in the area. It was all about action, right? It was, I went, got the best sort of, cattle from all of North India, mobilized resources, and did everything. What was the consequence? As long as I was there, it worked well. And within 1 year, it was all gone. Somebody stole the cattle, some died, and all sorts of things. Yeah, somebody says, Motihari, that's where I began my official life. This pattern continued in several of my postings. Then in the year 2004, I took a hard look back and I said to myself, it was leading up to that the way I am doing is not enough, because what happens is that I do something great and I by then build up this reputation in BR saying, this officer does great work. But this work is of no use to people. It is only good for my ego and for my satisfaction. But unless you do something sustainable, it not work. So what did I do? I actually took a bank loan, jeopardized the future of my family, and actually took almost 6 years off and just spent all that time in contemplation, for which I trained myself. I actually went back to university. I did an MSc, I did a PhD, which was not the regular PhD. It was a contemplation of my work. When I actually produced a thesis, which was called State Incapacity by Design. I will repeat it. State Incapacity by Design. It was a reflection of my own life and the socio-political and economic context in which I was working. And I was trying to tease out some of the patterns that I saw and the conscious destruction of state capacity, not because somebody wanted to destroy it, because of the inexorable movement of the socio-economic and political features of that time. Why I wanted to raise this is that when I look at my own life, where I was so fortunate to have the opportunity to be in positions of significance as the world sees it, but more importantly, I had access to tremendous power of the state, the resources of the state, and the eagerness of the people of Bihar, whom I love so much, because they have shaped my life. They have given me much more than I have given them. They've taught me lessons that you cannot learn anywhere else. But what that forced me and what that encouraged me was that period of long reflection, and then begins phase 2 of my life. And what are the features of the phase 2? They are in search of solutions where I first look for what I call incentive compatibility. I am much more contemplative on the design features of what I plan to do. I plan for exit from day 1. And number 4, I have realized with the new sort of things that are happening in digital, especially in a government context, this whole notion of shared digital infrastructure, if you take it even much wider societal platforms, what it does is that it enables a system to take a pathway which others can build upon, but also destroy. What people do not understand in government is because the fast turnover, I'm sorry, my examples are all from government, because that's been almost more than 3 decades of my life. Also, I've turned a new avatar since the last 4 years, when I took voluntary retirement from services 4 years ahead of my time, to work in a philanthropy, because again, that was a very conscious decision. I'll speak of later in case there is time. But since you asked me about success and failure, what I want to say is that to be able to look at what are the deep sort of incentive structures facing people, and try and curate a response which is in the realm of feasibility. And I again and again turn to one of the most finest officers I have worked under. He said, it has to be administratively feasible, financially viable, politically, I think the word he used was, I think, it's a mixture between feasibility, reasonability, viability.
Acceptability, politically
acceptability, exactly. Is that so when you look at incentive compatibility and then you do a +1 on that and you design it for such, that's when you have a much greater chance of success. But then again, I keep convincing myself that the worst thing you can do is to be addicted to success. While you should plan for success, if you are not ready for failure, then you will, in most often in the cases, you will undersell your initiative, you will underdo, there's no such word, but let me just create a new word, you will not go far enough. And in that sense, what the Gates Foundation challenges us to do every day is to swing for the fences. So we have to swing for the fences, be ready to make the mistakes, but be very careful in the way that we curate it, because the unintended consequence of our action, particularly when you are in situations of great power, if I may say so, can actually be extremely harmful for people who are in the margins, people who are already disadvantaged. And therefore, unless you're conscious of that, and I'm aware of so many things that I have done which have had unintended consequences, but it is that period of great reflection and experimentation that gives me the confidence that one can do a better job of it today. So these are the 2 phases that I thought I should leave with dear friends who are here in the call today. Kushbu.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew. I liked how you You touched upon a very important point, and that is going to be the focus of this discussion also, the sustainability. And you spoke about alignment of incentives as something that should be by design, so that whatever we are implementing is actually sustainable. And a lot of our...
Can I say something here?
Yes, yes, absolutely, please.
I'm sorry, I mean, the way, when you recounted it to me, I suddenly realized that I've left out something very important. We live in a very unjust society. If we are going to think of incentive compatibility and therefore lead us to not have the ability, the strength and the courage to take on and fight that injustice, that will be another great injustice. So when I talk of incentive compatibility, I am not saying that we should not be ready to fight against the injustice that we see today, particularly for the benefit of the marginalized. Just that caveat is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that, Dr. Matthew. And that is something that is very interesting, and that actually takes me to Ashraf. Ashraf, this idea of fighting for justice, to be ready as a leader, am I committed to my notion of justice? And then am I ready to fight for it? And this, though, when we talk of leadership, something that even Dr. Matthew used the word, it's power is very closely always associated term with leadership. And usually we discuss leadership among actors in the formal system roles. A cluster resource person has certain power, certain authority. A block education officer is slightly more powerful. Then there are certain powers that vest, or authority that rests with the state leadership. But your organization, Pravah and ComMutiny both, focus on community leadership. Now, for those of us who are working on leadership development as a mission, and this is something that at Shiksha Lokam we keep coming back to, there's a concept of agency and influence without authority. It's very intriguing, and you actually work on the subject. And when I was going through your website, I actually loved this quote that was written there, that leaders are neither born nor made, but they are nurtured in empowering spaces. This nurturing and empowering spaces, I'm really intrigued. So help us understand more. What does it take to create these empowering spaces? And are there recipes that our audience here on the call today that they can take back to their organizations and even maybe within a government system? And over the years, have you really seen that the youth leaders that you work with, have they been able to fight for justice that Dr. Matthew just referred to?
Nice. Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Khushbu. Yeah, and I'll pick up from where Dr. Matthew left off, and you also talked about, social justice leader. And if you really, I think maybe talk a little bit about spaces and then some ideas on what we are doing and what we've learned. So I think this conversation around spaces and empowering spaces for us began a few years down the line after we had done some work on the ground, and we were doing a research on how to build leadership and leadership spaces. And we thought of the freedom movement as being one beautiful example where there were so many young people who were involved in the freedom movement, and from where so much leadership emerged. And we were trying to study the spaces from then and now where young people are and how leadership has transformed. And I think I'll just take a little bit of that example. And what was interesting in our study, and maybe now interesting to some of you would already know that, but I just want to share, this was in 2012 or 13, we did the study, and we were studying what was the space for young people like during the freedom movement, where so many young people got involved. So we know that many, many young people, some of our most wonderful leaders were in that process, people who we look up to, etc., and have learned a lot from. It's very interesting, but in the first Lok Sabha, when, after the freedom movement, we got our freedom and the elections happened, and then in the first Lok Sabha, 26% of the parliamentarians were young people. By young people, I'm saying under 40. Okay, this is broadly the definition of young. Not very young, but it's okay. So, and how many people were there in the cabinet? When the cabinet was formed, there was only one person. Dr. Jagjeevan Ram was the one person under 40 who was in the first cabinet. Second Lok Sabha, after second elections, there were 32% young people. So the percentage of young people has increased. But guess how many people were in the cabinet? I mean, I can just ask people to guess. If anybody wants to guess how many people, young people were there in the cabinet, just want to share, none. So it's interesting to see a pattern where the number of young people are increasing, their desire to engage is increasing. I mean, I'm just taking an example. This public representation is an example of engagement in the public life. And but their role in decision making is diminishing. So their numbers in the cabinet where the decision making happens is diminishing. And today, like we have 13%. If the young people in parliament, roughly around 13%. This was some time back. I need to check if there's anything. And the average age of the parliament is around 65. Okay. So I mean, this kind of data sort of gives us only one thing, that even where there is engagement and excitement of young people to engage, but when it comes to decision making, they are often excluded. They're not at the table. So, and if we come, and this, when we were doing the study about spaces, we started seeing, okay, let's study what are the spaces like even today, and the spaces where young people are. So taking just that as an example and see what happens in the spaces that young people occupy. And there are 4 spaces, how we framed it. If you look at young people typically occupy 4 spaces. One is that of family, of friends, education and livelihood, and then leisure, recreation, whatever. If we say that these are the 4 spaces where we spend maximum of our time as young people, but when you study these 4 spaces, each of them in your family, even today, like CSTS study some years ago indicated that certain decisions around my decisions as a young person, whether who I will marry, okay, who I will find as my life partner or whatever, life partner, what career decisions I will take, who I will be friends with. A large percentage of young people are seriously not able to take their own decisions on things that matter, that will make them and shape their lives, without full approval of so-called authority, which is parents, right? So this is the kind of space we have. In schools and colleges, who asks the young people to design the curriculum? Nobody does, right? Who asks the students really genuinely what sort of teachers we want, or really ask for feedback on the teachers, really honest feedback? Doesn't happen. So again, this is a place then which is not, the rules are not set by young people, even though young people are there in millions. And so similarly, even in friends, there's actually peer pressure. I'm not exactly being myself. I'm so determined by, okay, if everybody is doing X, then I'll also do X, even though I want to do something else, I may not. It's just peer pressure. So things like this, all the spaces that young people occupy, you see, the rules are not really set by them. And what it does is, therefore, for some of the young people, they need to strike out and look for the space where they can, I don't know whether Dr. Santhosh meant it like that, but where they can genuinely contemplate and reflect on who they are, who they want to be, what they want to do in their lives. And so this patriarchy and hierarchy in our society doesn't necessarily give the kind of space for a young person to become sort of the self-awakened active citizen, where they are figuring out their connections and taking leadership. And the core question, what happens is, so I just want to move on. So we find that lots of young people, so we started looking at, why are young people coming to our programs, right? And we said, what are we doing well and what are we failing on? One thing we saw that they are seeing in this program, or these, it's like another space. This is the space where they are getting, where they volunteer. So what do? We essentially, young people come through our programs, there's leadership journeys, and they also volunteer in social causes, movements, to learn about themselves and learn about society, learn about different issues. These are typically the kind of nature of programs that happen in school and in college. And this is what is a kind of a 5th space they discover, a space that is different from those 4 spaces, a space that they are sort of co-creating, they are co-leading, they are saying what they want to do, they are setting, co-setting the rules. Some of them are structured by us, but they are setting the rules of where they want to go, what they want to do, who they want to meet, what they want to learn. And most of all, it's a space of great bonding and diversity. It's the kind of diversity you will not get in your erstwhile spaces. So this is space of volunteering and active citizenship. This is what I call, spaces for nurturing leaders. And this is what we call the fifth space. If you want, should I continue? Should I talk about the principles? Yeah. So
Please.
this is how what we articulated in our book. It's called Ocean in a Drop. And we sort of put a book down which talks about this fifth space, what it means, what it takes to construct. And the good thing about it is the space does not have a name. So all young people who co-create this space can name it the way they want it. So it is as diverse as the people who make it. And who makes it? Young people and youth workers. So in this work, we have, from our study, we came up with certain principles and practices which help. And I think to me, the closest to what I wish to share is we really found that there are 5 feelings. How do you know it's a fifth space? And we said there are 5 feelings which can determine whether this is a fifth space or not, where young people are learning about self and society through social action. And these feelings are love, we define it, love, learning, freedom, ownership, and social hope. If these 5 feelings are there in a space, then you know the young person is genuinely experiencing their own awakening and they are contributing to social change. And we also use the word Jagrik a lot. And this is the nurturing space for a Jagrik, which is a self-awakened active citizen. And it's not somebody who's arrived. You asked me what is leadership. I said, ye Jagrik koi aise nahi koi jo arrive hota hai. It's a continuing learning journey. So this is some of the work we do. And part of it is, one of the core things is having wonderful youth workers. People, these can be teachers. These can be general people who don't have any necessarily formal training, but understand the principles and can be trained or supported to learn about how to co-create this space with young people. So to me, the core is the space, the characteristics of the space, and the facilitators of the space. That's what makes, and this space can be anywhere. Now what we are saying is, we should not have this space where somebody has to go out. Why can't this space be in the school, in the family? Why can't as friends we go out and do this social change action and then talk and reflect about our learnings and learn about ourselves? So this is what we're talking about, mainstream the fifth space to be part of all our 4 spaces. This is what we call the empowering spaces for young people.
Thank you, Ashraf. That was really, really amazing to listen to in terms of how you spoke about the role of society, how we operate as society in our day-to-day life. It affects us as individuals and how we demonstrate or perform in our life. Right? So if decision is not something that we are encouraged to take from the beginning, how do we, as adults, suddenly you're expected to lead decisions and perform like a leader? It doesn't come very naturally. Yeah. And you also talked about this aspect of co-creation, agency. There's so many beautiful aspects that you spoke about this fifth space. And Dr. Matthew, I'm curious that, usually one, and I can really bet if I just conduct a survey right now saying one word that you identify with any government system, people will say hierarchy. So now one side, Ashraf is talking about creating this empowering space where people are given freedom to experiment, take decisions. And you also touched upon this point about experimenting, making mistakes, but being mindful of your unintended consequences. When you are operating with that level, at that level of, so many people are reporting to you or working with you, you are really so afraid to make any mistakes so that they don't get affected by mistake also. So how do we go about developing leadership in the government system? Because unless that is sorted, it is going to be a big puzzle piece in the whole game.
Kushbu, this is not something you're going to sort out. I mean, let me give you an example. You actually talked of hierarchy, right? But you must understand that government is not a closed system where just hierarchy dominates. Government is, of course, hierarchical, but believe it or not, who sits on top of the hierarchy, at least conceptually, and I believe even increasingly in a practical sense, Who do you think sits on top? Kushbu, let me ask you. Who do you think sits on top of the government hierarchy?
It could be a minister if we go all to the political side.
Okay, minister.
Or in the
On top
administration.
of that is the chief minister. But guess what? The answer is no. Because on top of the chief minister sits that electorate who elects the chief minister. And believe it or not, that is the reality of government. So the point I want to make is that hierarchy in government is there for a purpose. And somehow we undermine, I think we misunderstand the role that our politicians are playing. I've worked for over 3 decades very closely with politicians in Bihar, politicians from other states, because I worked in government of India. And there's one thing that I'm deeply convinced, including with my reflection and studies, is that if there is one thing that they are driven by, and that is their electoral success. And that's how democracy is actually wired. You see, it is because that they are pursuing their electoral success that people have a chance to influence them to their voting behavior. The point I want to make is that, again, I'll give you an example, an extreme example I will give you, is that, therefore, when you stand up for what you think is right, when you march, when you march, again, that's very important. It has to be contemplative in the sense that, and it has to be founded on scholarship. It has to be founded on a deep understanding of the situation, not just, criticism for the sake of criticism. Now, let me give you how are we doing for time?
We're good.
1992, I was posted as the district magistrate of a district called Palamu, which is now in Jharkhand, was then in Bihar. And the district was going into a severe drought. That's when I was posted there. Before that, Sanjay and me were colleagues in Saharsa before that. So that's when 1992, I go there. And what do I see? I see a district which has immense natural resources. Almost 40% or so was forested, extremely rich, and we had a tiger sanctuary, right? From my house, the house of what it's called deputy commissioner there, about 12 odd kilometers was the Betla Tiger Reserve. Hundreds of elephants, such rich, lush. The reason I'm saying that is that itself gives you a lot of protection, right? But I saw a politics which was deeply exploitative of the predominantly Dalit and tribal communities of my district. I saw another kind of exploitation. If you looked at the rainfall figures of the district, in no year, and typically Palamu goes into a drought cycle once in 10 years. Once in a decade, you get the severe drought and immense suffering and catastrophic effects. But if you look at the rainfall data, in no year was the district of Palamu, by the way, now district of Palamu is divided into, I don't know how many districts, I've lost touch. I knew Latehar has come, but I don't know further has come or not. Anyway, the point is, never has the rainfall average gone below 700 millimeters. Park that number there. So I go through a severe drought. I'm doing all sorts of crazy things. I'm trying to build pani panchayats of, tribals and Dalits. I'm trying to build water conservation structures. I'm asking for Shramdan. And then in the parliament, there's a massive hangama targeted at my efforts. Hangama is really what happened. And to quell the hangama in the parliament, the prime minister stands up and says, Narasimha Rao was the prime minister, he said, I will go to Palamu and I will check it out. That's how we quelled the pandemonium in parliament. So what happens? The honorable prime minister comes to Palamu and then he's reviewing the drought conditions in the drought work. By the way, I'm not even in the review meeting because I was handling law and order. It's an extremist affected district. But then I'm suddenly called into the meeting, and where the honorable chief minister tells me that the Honorable Prime Minister wants your feedback on what's the situation on the ground. So I took about 4 or 5 minutes explaining, when I actually said, sir, what we need is not drinking water. What we need is water conservation. Because in my district, we've never had less than 7 million. And that's much more than is enough to have a thriving agriculture, and certainly not drought. If you could conserve water where it falls and make it available to communities. What I had not realized was that the state government at the time, led by the leadership, was arguing for more bigger dams, was arguing for more deep boring tube wells. And here was the district magistrate who was arguing exactly in the opposite direction. Why I want to say that is I'm talking about hierarchy in government. There then came a point where I had to actually contradict my chief minister in front of my prime minister. And you know what I said? I'm not sure I would have said it now because I'm much wiser today. I said, sir, we have to agree to disagree. The point I want to say is that we underestimate our politicians. It is the same Santosh Matthew who in 1992 said that about his chief minister in front of the prime minister, who continued to be respected in the cadre among the same politicians of what? Of in the opposition or in the proposition. The point I want to make is that the great thing about our government is that the ultimate accountability lies with the people. And therefore, if you stand up, not just because you want to stand up, but because there are facts backing you, there is analysis backing you, then our Indian democracy, I still believe, and this is what, as I was a professor for 6 years at what is called, nominally the IAS Academy in Missouri, it's actually the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration. This is what I was trying to get across to the youngsters who were recruited and who were coming there, that if you can base your advice on professional understandings, then I believe we have a politics and we have a hierarchy which is willing to deal with it. Of course, you will have short-term problems. You may get transferred. You may get into a position where instead of 3 cars, there'll be only 1 car, or where the budget instead of 2,000 crores is 2 crores. But that's okay. That's why you have constitutional protection. So hierarchy, frankly, Khushbu, is not the problem. It is how much do you want to lead? How much do you want to be an agent of transformation? What have you set as your life goals? What motivates you? What do you go to bed worried about? What do you wake up? What energizes you? And that will obviously be a combination of nature and nurture. And that's why what you do in the schools with youngsters, I have another story to tell, but only if time permits, is that if you nurture them when they are young and give them the self-confidence that they can actually be agents of change, that's when our tomorrow will be brighter. That's when our youngsters will become the true leaders that we deserve. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew. And that is something I think that all our audience here on this call can take back. That how do we start, like they say, catch them young. In our school itself, when we say we are creating an enriching learning environment for our children, what exactly are we creating for them? Is that something where we are asking them to, ask the right questions, be responsible, and take on leadership as a trait early on, so that when they become adults, they are able to stand up and, like you said, hierarchy, no hierarchy, I'm able to fight for what I see that it's backed by facts and my experiences. So this one thing that you, maybe a quick response from you, Dr. Matthew, you touched upon this aspect of officers getting transferred. And that is something that we keep hearing a lot from any civil society organization that has worked with government, that people in leadership positions, especially in the administrative side, keep getting transferred. And at times too frequently for any program to actually take shape. And new leaders obviously will come with their own vision, their own experiences, their own plans. And I'm exaggerating for the purpose of this discussion. People feel at the ground level, they feel that circulars and schemes keep coming one after the other. So probably the best thing to do is to not do anything. And that's a mindset that as civil society organizations, most of us are fighting against. The tendency is to just wait it out. And also a related factor that affects people is that there's very little institutional memory that exists in the system. Wonderful reform efforts get wiped off people's memory within a couple of years. So when working with a government system, whether as an insider or as an outsider, is sustainability of change efforts. I mean, how do you interpret sustainability of change efforts? Is that a realistic expectation? And as someone who led the education system of a state and several other initiatives like you were just describing in examples, what did you do to ensure that continuity of change efforts is maintained in spite of the flux? I understand you did touch upon this when you talked about the incentive alignment, but is there something else that we should do, something that you would advise this group of people here to keep into consideration when they're going on field?
See, the problem, thank you, I'll make this short. The problem is we are looking for stability of the administrative class. That's not where you should look for stability. You should look for stability in the deep-rooted political winds of the place. Ultimately, remember, we are living in democratic spaces. And therefore, if you want sustainable interventions, you have to look at the drivers of politics and patiently work through that. And then seize the opportunity when you find reform champions. Sanjay, for example, is a great reform champion. But then Sanjay by himself cannot do anything. But if you have a great understanding of the politics of the time, and you have built up your initiatives from ground up, then the great thing about the Indian state is that it will respond. Not only it will respond, it will find people like Sanjay to come to precisely those positions to be able to solve for what are the problems of the time. But you cannot expect what you're calling a sustainable reform when your politics is in one direction and your goals for change through administrative action are in the opposite direction. This is the conundrum that I faced as a young officer, where I was taught that, you have to be a karma yogi. You have to just do what you have to do and not worry about the consequences, which I completely agree with, but that's at a personal level. But you have to do what you have to do by worrying about the consequences, not for you, but for the unintended consequences of the people and what the system can take at a time in terms of the incentive compatibilities that appear at it. It requires a different level of analysis. And it has been my observation. And I mean, so some of my greatest, my single greatest achievement, frankly, are two. One is the time I spent for 6 years at the academy in Missouri, where I was able to interact with these. My greatest sustainability is the youngsters of that time today who are, additional chief secretaries in states and secretaries in states. The kind of way they have remained steadfast as leaders who are champions of reform and social justice. That is sustainability. But if you want to look at a programmatic sustainability, it is what we were able to do not in education, but in rural development with MGNREGS, the entire financial system, and the way digital was leveraged. And in one of my greatest learnings from inside government is that if you really want sustainability, then design the neural networks, the digital systems in such a way that others can build upon. And MGNREG is the finest example of grassroots action that was then fostered over time, built brick by brick, and the digital system that we have today. So that even if there is leadership change in MGNREGS, you will find that a certain level of stability, the program is still able to deliver. But activists will complain that by September, money runs out. But yes, today money runs out and it is very transparent to people that money has run out. So that political action for more money to be allocated is actually feasible. It's actually possible. So the problem with us is that when we design programs, when we think of individual action, we think of it of civil society action in collaboration with people like me or people like Sanjay. I'm out of the system, so I'm no longer, relevant. It's like people like Sanjay, who are great reform champions. But we need a much more holistic look at the thing where the politics and the administrative reality are actually contemplated, and you design your interventions. You will find that great people like Sanjay will come into those positions because of the way I believe the state today is forced, not because it wants to, but because forced to respond because the way our electoral politics is also changing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew. That's very interesting, and something that I think all of us should aspire towards, to say, how do we, it may look outside our immediate control, but if we take a long-term view, ultimately how the whole electoral politics and the change or the reforms that we want to see in our society, how are we able to align these two, is something that is really going to drive our sustainability of our efforts. Ashraf, I want to quickly come to you, and there's a very interesting, when we speak of sustainability, one of the traps that most of us, as someone who is in a leadership role in an organization, also fall trap to, is we don't plan our own exit strategy. And what I find interesting is that in your journey as a leader, an entrepreneur, you set up 2 institutions, and today you yourself are not part of the executive team of either. It's very interesting to me, because to me it says you believe that my organization will sustain and thrive beyond me. What led you to have this trust? And more importantly, what did you do within the team over the years to be able to step out? And is there certain learning, certain actionable tips that all of us on this call can take back to say that this is how sustainability can be thought of in terms of our own organizational journey and as our own leadership journey?
Thanks, Khushbu. Thank you. And I'm going to thread it with the previous conversation a little bit on sustainability, and you talked about government systems. So I'm just going to connect 2 thoughts. I think the one big thing about sustainability is that looking at developing people. So once you have worked with educators, and I think that's what you do at Chichalukam, once you've invested in educators, and by educators, I mean also youth workers who are in the informal space. I mean, completely invisibilized group that is there in our community. And they can be anything. They can be part-time youth workers, full-time youth workers, but they are also educators. Once we've invested in this learning about what is youth work, what is psychosocial work, how do you nurture and create a space for young people and with young people, it catches in the heart, it becomes like your fire. And I have seen like hundreds and hundreds of young people and youth who've been through this journey. So what is sustainability is that the journey for young people should be such that they will have a lifetime experience of change, not only within but outside, but they will also commit to, by just naturally, it'll evolve, it's organic renewal in a system. We call it a very important principle of the 5th space, that whoever has been through the journey then will naturally nurture young leaders, no matter what they're doing, whether they're in the corporate sector, NGO sector, media, kahin pe bhi. So that is, this sustainability has to be seeded in what we do, that the young people also will lead and support other young people to lead, no matter which sector. So I think this has been an important principle of our work. It's an organic renewal process. So I just wanted to say, if you've invested in the teacher, if the teacher has got understood, if the educator has understood, it's not going to go away. It's that learning then never goes away. You'll never not create a nurturing space once you know how to create one. You cannot unlearn that. So I just believe in that, and that's what's kept us going. Sorry, now I'll come to your question about sustainability and what role about leadership in organizations. So for me, pehle to I haven't like left. Like a lot of people say, no, acha, I have not left. Let me confess, I haven't left. And I haven't left because I can't leave. I haven't left because I enjoy what we are. I mean, that the organization will not run without me, not for that reason. I haven't left because I have found another role and I do what I treasure and what the organization gets value out of. So I do something, but I don't run. Yes, I don't do day-to-day running, and I'm not running these two organizations in that way that once upon a time I used to. So, but I choose to continue to remain connected deeply. And I think that is also in a way, it's different for different organizations, but it's certainly, I think, work for us or work for me. It's part of also sustainability in the sense of continuing to contribute, but in a completely different role and in a smaller capacity. So yeah, I have a small executive engagement in both the organizations, and of course I'm on the board. So this is when you ask what makes for sustainability, I think a couple of things. Maybe it's in the original vision of when we set up Pravah. I just want to share some of the things that may have landed us here right in the beginning. So our background is we are from the corporate sector. I mean the original early founders, Arjun, Meenu, and I were all from the corporate sector, and we did not set up this with the idea of NGO khada karenge. We were just volunteering in schools. There was a communal conflict and we wanted to work on social issues, and we wanted young people to understand what how that this violence that they see outside is also a manifestation of who we are. And this exploration of identity is just not who am I, but who are we, and to explore the identity quest as a collective, as a humanity, as a shared humanity. So we were on that mission and we were doing volunteering. But the work became so much in schools, our workshops, became so, even in our first workshop, you asked me, I'm just connecting a few questions which I didn't answer in the earlier one, if I may. You asked me what changes do we see and what kind of leadership. For us, leadership is everything. Leadership is when, even in our first workshop way back in 1993, that time Pravah was not set up as an organization. We were just volunteering. The first workshop we did with a school of 9th standard students. And we were talking about conflicts and all kinds of discrimination around caste, around religion, around gender, around regions. And I remember there picking up really issues which no teacher or no school was really looking at, talking about serious conflicts that are happening in the real world. And we think that children are not connected to it, but young people know what's going on. It's just that nobody's talking to them. And when we were talking about issues, and I will say, we talked about in that workshop, generation gap, issues that matter to them. We also talked about what was happening in Kashmir that time. This in the 90s. We talked about the demolition of the Babi Masjid and the riots that followed. We talked about the riots. We were children when 1984 happened, right? So we talked about that time also. And, the students, and not talked about it, just helped people to talk about violence, hate, discrimination. And lots of young people came back to us and said, we really think this is not correct. And we really think we should not be living in creating this kind of world. But this is the first time anybody's talking to us about it. And now we can at least go and talk to our parents. If our parents have some discriminatory viewpoints, at least we can have a discussion. So they suddenly found a voice in that space because we were willing to listen and discuss what's happening in life, and what Shubhalalji shared was about paradoxes. This whole understanding of paradoxes is so important, and it's so important to be introduced at an early age. And I think that's what we did. We talked about issues looking at different perspectives. So to me, leadership is about seeding an ability to think critically, feel, connected, and think from different perspectives and different multiple viewing points, and then taking action. So this kind of training also happens within the organization. It's not that you do in school and call it something, but you also do it for yourself. You constantly are training, you're learning yourself. So I think a lot of learning within internal processes of learning, decision making, how to take decisions, and so a lot of learning has happened about this thing of stepping out and leadership. Yes, I just want to talk about two things. So going back, because we were from the corporate sector at that time, we said, Acha, now if you have to set up and do this, do we want to set up a corporate-like system, or should we try some other experiment? And early on, and way back in 96, I think we said, no, we will not have any branches. Maybe we'll have one or two just for an experiment, but we will not have branches. So, and why? Because we feel that every place has young people, the context is different. We may have basic principles, but we need youth workers and young organizations and leaders everywhere, and young leaders who will create their own spaces. So very early on, we decided that we will seed organizations which are wanting to do similar work, seed young leaders which are wanting to do similar work, but on themes that they are passionate about. So we started this program called Change Rooms, where we actually selected, it's been running for many years. We've supported about 600 young people, young leaders to either start up or start up separate organization or initiatives of their own. And they could come with any issue. They come with what is their passion, their dream. I want to work on gender issues. I want to work on disability. I want to work on communalism. I want to work on livelihood, whatever issue that is every young person's passion, they come with that. But when they leave the program or the journey or the space, they leave with the understanding of what is youth development, what is systems thinking, what is facilitation and design of youth spaces, and deep self-awareness work, how to constantly evolve and learn. When they leave, they all also become youth workers. So they all embed youth work, leadership work in their program. And now there's a whole generation of leaders, like the organizations that come out of Change Rooms initiatives of Pravah are now running their own fellowship programs where they are nurturing young leaders and working in schools. So it's like I'm telling you the story of, because in our DNA was this thing of seeding leadership and not wanting to only be this one giant organization that is all over. Yes, the organizational aspirations are always there to be growing and but to also constantly seed an ecosystem. And I'm very happy to share that many of these leaders who came out are now setting up state collectives. And they're also part of setting up the National Youth Collective kind of a system. So it's not only doing my independent work, and we use this word Saath Nirbhar, that yes, some organizations independent hai, or they're just independent organizations, but we all work together. So we are also interdependent. So the whole idea is, yes, everyone will have a different color, different identity, different ways of working, similar values, shared values, basic principles of youth work, and working together. So the Saath Nirbhar piece is really important. And just now, 2 years back, I'm just saying what is sustainability for us. So sustainability for us is hundreds and hundreds of organizations. And if it's 300 million young people we have to work, one organization not going to do it, even 100 won't. We need hundreds and hundreds. Plus, we just do not need youth workers. So 2 years back, we set up this coalition called the Varta Leap Coalition, where our mission is every youth a Jagrik, every space nurturing Jagriks. And there what we are working on is, it's not just the job of a youth worker or a social worker or a teacher to build leaders in education. This job of educating young people to be leaders is everyone's. So I think in a way, like Shibulalji was also sharing with, leadership at all levels, distributed leadership and leadership in all sectors, and every sector there are young people, and everyone has to look at young people and how we are creating a youth-centric space for a young person to lead, no matter where they are. So that has been our journey. And because the journey has been about creating ecosystems, I think it made it easier, Khushbu, for us to think about us as all of us as an ecosystem, that we are all dots, tiny dots, on our own can't do anything, and we have to work together. That's how it happened. Internally, I'll just have 2 minutes and I'll answer your internal question. We are out of time, then I can just take a minute.
Yes, 1 minute is fine.
Okay, so internally, what has helped us is that basically we also decided, I'm an HR, my background is HR, and early on in HR, you learn that you don't be in the same job forever. Yeah. And part of a good organization is people continuously learn. And early on, we'd also decided, and my theory is a founder, CEO should not be in leadership, in the CEO position more than 10 years. So early on, we had said we will build leadership transition. So a lot of work on second line leadership and we also asked everyone, do you want second CEO from outside or inside? Everyone said inside. And this has then become a culture. So we are building second line leadership. So there is a shared leadership team every few years from where the CEO sort of emerges. It may change tomorrow, I don't know. But so far we've had 4 generations of leaders in Pravah, and all coming from within and all through a shared leadership group, which means the CEO is not everything. It's not katta datta. There is a senior leadership team which works together, and the distance between the first person, the youngest person, and the oldest person is hardly there. I mean, there is hierarchy, like it's necessary, but the distance in terms of the processes and the engagement is so limited that everybody learns leadership fast. So everybody gets into everybody a leader positions, and that's how what has helped me. You asked me, that's how what has helped all of us. I think it's about trusting yourself, trusting the space, and then doing real hard work to make it happen together. That's what has made it happen. Thanks.
And that's beautiful to listen to, Ashraf. And I'm sure the experiencing this kind of a space where people are empowered, enabled, and nurtured is something that people can just imbibe. And then obviously, like Dr. Santosh Matthew also said in the beginning, that children don't just learn because we teach them, but because they see us behave in that fashion. So that is so much more powerful and so much more life-changing. I think in this entire we have already completed 60 minutes. I didn't even realize. Thank you so much. I think time will never be sufficient if we just have people like you on the panel, Ashraf and Dr. Matthew. We started from talking about relationships and how leadership is all about relationship with itself and society. And we talked about how it's about thinking, how do we summon resources so that we can drive action. And then Ashraf added action to promote love and for the good of society. We also talked about how, and it's a personal takeaway, that how do we not let the apprehensions of hierarchy or transfers affect how we are designing our programs, and how do we think beyond and think really long term in terms of how we are defining sustainability of our change efforts. And there's so much to take back to how we design our programs. And Dr. Matthew also talked about the whole building block approach that I'm sure our audience would appreciate, that if there's something that can be designed that can just, it has its own life journey and it can be taken up no matter the framework and the fundamental approach. If that is something that is reusable, it will live, throughout all the transitions that government system may see. We also talked about, I think this is one piece that I really want to summarize and leave this thought with our audience here, that enabling students or any stakeholders to engage with multiple perspectives has to be part of our design. If we are working inside classroom, outside classroom with any adults or students, I think how do we create those spaces for people to engage in dialogue so that they're aware, and if they're aware, they're able to think, and if they think, they're able to feel connected, like Ashraf said, and if they're connected, they will automatically take action. And ultimately in life, it's all about those micro actions, those micro improvements that make all the difference. So thank you so much, Dr. Matthew, Ashraf, for taking time out for this discussion. I'm sure I have pages and pages of notes from this conversation. Thank you for making time, and we really look forward to our next set of discussions that are already lined up. We see that our next set of speakers have already started joining in. Audience, there's a wonderful discussion lined up here where stakeholders, the real leaders from the ground, are going to join us for the next 60 minutes. I now hand it over to Neeraj.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Khushbu. Thank you so much, Ashraf and Dr. Matthew. I think apart from what Khushbu could synthesize, I think your conversation definitely opened up the different perspectives that is needed to look at leadership. I, for myself, could look at what it means to look at leadership, what it means to look at who an ideal leader is, and also to look at what would make me an effective leader. And I think you brought different perspectives about leadership, not just as a personal narrative, but also in context of organizations, missions, systems. Thank you so much. I hope the audience also feels the same. I hope it's at least opened the box about leadership that we will unravel piece by piece in this entire session. Thank you so much again for taking time out to be part of this 1 hour conversation. Yes, I completely agree. 16 minutes really passed off very swiftly.